This video is an introduction to linear equations. Linear equations are a little bit different from what you're used to. You are used to equations with just one variable. You can see some examples here. They contain only a single variable, usually an x, but sometimes other variables as well. And when you solve them, as you can see, 2x equals 10, we just divided both sides of the equation by 2, and we get x equals 5. We have one single solution. Now we're going to learn about equations with two variables. That is, equations which contain both an x and a y variable. Instead of just a single solution, they usually have an infinite amount of solutions, which are written as ordered pairs. And another way to represent all these solutions is to graph them. So we're going to look at an example here. I have the equation written, y equals 2x minus 2. I have a graph for us to graph it, and I started a table of values. You first pick your x values. I picked 0, 1, and 2 because they're usually the easiest. We take each of those values and we will plug them in the equation for x, and then we will solve for y. See if we can try one. I'm going to start with the x value of 0, and I'm going to plug it in here for x. So I'm going to have y equals 2 times 0 instead of times x minus 2. And when I solve that, I'll get 0 minus 2, or y equals negative 2. So I'm going to put that value in here for y. And this tells me that when x equals 0, y equals negative 2. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the other values that I have here. Let's just erase what we have. All right, so now I'm going to go to 1. When x equals 1, this is going to give me 2 minus 2. So this tells me that y equals 0. Put a 0 in here for y. So when x equals 1, y equals 0. We'll do one more. We do 3 points. That'll give us a nice graph. I'm going to put a 2 in here for x. I'm now going to have 4 minus 2, and y equals 2. So now I'm going to graph those points. So the first point is ordered pair here is just 0, comma, negative 2. So I go 0 over 0 and down negative 2, put my dot. My next ordered pair is 1, comma, 0. I go over 1 and 0 up or down, so my point is right there. My last point is 2, comma, 2, so I go over 2 and up 2. Now, the trick about a linear equation is that they're going to graph to be a line. So if your points don't line up perfectly, then you know that you've made a mathematical error. So I'm going to use a line here. And I can see that they line up perfectly. And that's going to be my linear equation. So when I have this equation, y equals 2x minus 2, it will graph to be this line right here. And every point on this line is a solution to this equation. Not just the 3 that I found, but every single point along this line is all solutions to this linear equation. I'd like to do one more example. So I have y equals 4x minus 6. And again, I've chosen the points 0, 1, and 2. Just written a little table here, wrote in 0, 1, and 2, and these are the points that I'm going to try. And again, I'd like them to line up on my graph when I plot them. And if they do line up, then I can be relatively sure that I've done it correctly. So let's start by replacing the x with our first point, which is 0. And we'll do our math. So y equals 0 minus 6. Y equals negative 6. So I'm going to put negative 6 in here. So when x equals 0, y equals negative 6. Let's go to the next point, 1. When x equals 1, I'm going to get 4 minus 6, which is negative 2. Negative 2 in here for the y value. We'll do one more, then we'll plot them. Put a 2 in here, and I'm going to get 8 minus 6, which is a positive 2. I'll put that in here. Now I have my 3 coordinate pairs, and I'm going to plot those. So I'll start with 0, negative 6, which is right here. 1, negative 2, which is right here. And 2, comma 2, which is right here. And you can see that they do line up really nicely. I'll go ahead and put a nice straight line in there for us. And that is the linear equation that I've just graphed. Another basic skill that we need to have when we're working with linear equations is to solve that equation for y. If you noticed down here, the equations that we were working with all had y equals and then everything else. Well, sometimes they don't look like that when we first get them. So we have to do a little bit of algebra to get them to look like that. So typically when you have an equation that has an x and a y in it, you like it to solve it for y. So let's see if we can do that. First thing here I'm going to do is get the 6x on the other side of the equation. So I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides. What that does is it cancels out because I have a positive 6x and a negative 6x. So that's gone. That leaves on this side just a 2y. On my other side, I have a 7 and a negative 6x. I cannot combine those because they're not like terms. So that's what I'm left with. Now I need another step because the y is still not all by itself. It's still multiplied to a 2. In order to undo multiplication, I'm going to divide. When I divide, I have to be very careful that I divide everything by 2. All 3 terms must be divided by 2. So over here, I just have y. Over here, I'll have 7 halves. It's okay that it's a fraction. It's perfectly fine. Here I have minus, right? We have a minus. And then I have 6 divided by 2, which is 3x. And that's my answer. Y equals 7 halves minus 3x. Don't be afraid of a fraction. It's perfectly fine that it's a fraction. Now let's look at our next example. A few extra steps here. But let's find that y. This is what we're trying to get all by itself, which means that everything else on this side has to go because the y has to be all by itself. I'm going to go ahead and start with this 4. It's a plus 4, so I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. This will cancel, and you can see that I've lined the minus 4 up with the positive 5 because those are like terms. So on this side, I still have my 6x, and I still have my positive 3y. This is going to give me a 1, and I still have my minus 3x. So I look back over here. Here's the y that I want by itself. So I'm going to look here to this term to get rid of this term. It is a positive 6x, so I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides of the equation. And I'll write that underneath the other x term because those are like terms. This cancels. And I'm left with just 3y on this side. And on this side, I'll have 1 minus 9x. You can see I'm getting closer. Now the y is just multiplied to the 3. So I'm going to divide, but be careful, you must divide everything